effing baby killers, just this and that. And I just kind of sipped my beer.
I was going to junior college, and over breakfast I heard on the radio that the Army was investigating a massacre in Vietnam. And I remember thinking, I hope that's not the one that I was involved in.
Do you believe that there was a cover-up of this incident in South Vietnam, of the incident at My Lai 4?
I have no reason to believe there was.
There was a huge uproar in the country. The top of the Army were absolutely furious that something like this could have happened 2 years before, nearly, and been held so that they knew nothing about it. So they really wanted to find out what had happened and how and who had covered it up.
They had to look for somebody who was a member of the team but was not necessarily going to be accused of covering up a cover-up. And the person they fell upon was Ray Pierce. Pierce had been a Corps commander in Vietnam. He'd had a very distinguished military career, and he was a deeply, deeply honourable and decent man.
General, is there any doubt in your mind now that the massacre did take place at My Lai on March 16th of 1968?
That's one of the things we're trying to determine.
Pierce made the decision, look, before I can decide what's been covered up, I got to know what happened. And then the only way we're going to know what happened is to talk to everybody that was there that will talk to us. There were maybe 800 people in this battalion. And we had to contact every one of them and try to arrange for them to come to Washington and testify.
When it finally registers and sinks in that there's something going on was when you actually started getting subpoenaed to the Peers Committee. What kind of trouble were we in? We don't know.
We were picked up in a military limousine, unmarked, and taken to the Pentagon, and I don't know how many levels down we went, but we went down. We went into what somebody referred to as a war room, and there were gigantic maps of My Lai all the way around the room, and they set us down at the end of the table, the microphone in front of us, feeling pretty small.
The next witness is Sergeant Gregory T. Olson.
Morning, Sergeant Olson. I show you also a 1 to 25,000 scale map which has been introduced in evidence as Exhibit Map 4. Can you take us through the village step by step?
Well, I've seen some of my friends shoot women, children, babies.
After you've gotten out of the helicopter here in the landing zone, could you tell us the first thing that happened?
I was in the second lift. We landed here.
All right. Could you mark about the location on there of the CP and just put a figure 1 and circle it? And which side of the village were you on? Were you on the left or the right?
Who was on your right? Who was on your left? Who was in front of you? Who was on the side of you? What happened? What time was this? Trying to, I'm assuming, at that time I didn't realize, that they were trying to synchronize. Are you lying?
Pierce was distressed, terribly distressed. The accumulation of all these things over the weeks of testimony really got to him, I think. And when he then would come across someone like Hugh Thompson, the helicopter pilot, it was almost a relief to him to realize that there are still really good Americans.
I would like you to repeat what you told the colonel at that particular interrogation.
I'd told him about seeing the wounded Vietnamese. I told him that the captain had came over and shot one of them. Told him about seeing the bodies in the ditch.
How many bodies did you tell him were in the ditch?
I think I said about 100, sir.
How did you feel at this particular time?
Felt like there had been a massacre.
In Pierce's mind, Thompson had done just what you'd want a soldier to do. And almost nobody else ever had, and nothing happened as a result of it.
what shocked Piers was that people who were in a position to prevent it happening had not done so, and then when they had knowledge that something had gone wrong, had actually then covered it up.
Did Mr. Thompson mention anything to you about landing alongside of a ditch that contained a large number of bodies?
No, sir.
Did he mention to you seeing a sergeant point his weapon in the direction of a ditch which contained some dead non-combatants?
No, sir. He did not report to me any incident of a U.S. soldier firing into a ditch filled with non-combatants or with anybody.
I think General Pierce was frustrated by his inability to get any kind of sensible explanations from Henderson, and concluded that Henderson, well, he was both incompetent and lying.
Now, I feel that the public is entitled to know that our inquiry clearly established that a tragedy of major proportions occurred there on that day.
Piers knew that his report should be completely truthful, and it had resulted in some 30 people from up through the ranks, from a lieutenant all the way up to a two-star general, being charged with offences involved in the cover-up itself.
Fort Benning, Georgia today, the prosecution opens its case against First Lieutenant William Calley, Jr., charged with the murder of more than 100 South Vietnamese civilians at My Lai.
I was an Army prosecutor at Fort Benning, Georgia. The first case was going to be against Lieutenant Calley because he was to be discharged from the service in September of that year. And under the law, once he was discharged, the Army would no longer have jurisdiction to prosecute him. So there was some time constraints. He was not charged with the massacre. He was charged with what he did. That was not everything that was done in that operation. But I will say this, that the evidence clearly demonstrated that he was responsible for more killing than anybody else there by a long shot.
Gentlemen, the accused stands here before you today, charged with 4 specifications: premeditated murder, alleged to have taken place in the village of My Lai 4, 16 March 1968.
This was going to be the first case in which the story in its entirety would be told. And so I wanted to tell the story in such a way for the jury to know, both circumstantially and directly, all of the evidence, to demonstrate quite clearly that what those charges said had occurred had in fact occurred. These people were murdered as we alleged they were murdered. They were unarmed, they were unresisting, they were children, and they were babies.
I'll ask you whether, in your opinion, you were acting rightly and according to your understanding of your directions and orders.
I felt then, and I still do, that I acted as I was directed. I carried out the orders that I was given, and I do not feel wrong in doing so.
If the orders for that operation included unarmed, unresisting men, women, children, and babies, it was illegal. And a soldier has a duty to disobey such an order.
A lot of people talk about My Lai and they say, well, yeah, but you can't follow an illegal order. Trust me, there is no such thing. Not in the military. If I go into a combat situation, I tell them, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to follow that order. They put me up against the wall and shoot me.
You train a man to soldier. You take him out of civilian life. You teach him to be a soldier. You train him to kill. You train him to follow orders. You express to him the importance of following orders. And you train him to kill.
True, we kill our enemies. But there comes a point in time at which you don't kill your enemy. He's entitled to be treated humanely. The most serious offense outside of war is the taking of a human life. And in war, there has to be limits. I told the jury, finally, I wanted to speak for the victims. And I reminded them they did not receive any trial. And I said, what were their crimes? These victims. Was it the crime of an infant simply to have been born in MYLAI? What were their crimes? And I said to them, at the end of the day, you are the conscience of our country when you render this verdict.
If I have committed a crime, the only crime that I have committed is in judgment of my values. Apparently, I valued my troops' lives more than I did that of the enemy. When my troops were getting massacred and mauled by an enemy I couldn't see, I couldn't feel, and I couldn't touch. And that was my enemy out there. And then when it became between me and that enemy, I had to value the lives of my troops. And I feel that is the only crime I have committed.
Lieutenant William Calley has been found guilty. A jury that deliberated a record 13 days after the longest court-martial in American military history found Calley guilty on all 4 counts arising from the killing of innocent, unarmed South Vietnamese civilians at the village of MYLAI.
I don't think there has ever been a verdict which has been more controversial or generated a greater public outcry of opposition than the verdict in that case. There were mass protests around the country. Draft boards were resigning. Veterans were turning in their medals. It was enormous, overwhelming.
My name is William Calley. I'm a soldier of this land. I've tried to do my duty and to gain the upper hand. But they've made me out a villain. They have stamped me with a brand as we go marching home.
It was a country that wanted this war to end, and a country which didn't want to believe that this had happened, but if it did, wanted to say that it's our fault collectively and not his fault.
Calley's been used. All the wars that we've had in the United States, we'll pick one man out of all them wars and say he committed atrocities against the enemy.
Well, all of us are soldiers, we're too busy to complain as we go marching home.
Good evening. President Nixon has ordered Lieutenant William Calley released from the stockade and confined to his quarters, pending review of his conviction and life sentence for the MYLAI massacre. The announcement came amid a deluge of telegrams to the White House, 25,000 a day, called the greatest expression of public sentiment by far on any issue of the Nixon presidency.
Within a very short space of time, President Nixon, trying to cope with some of the political fallout from this, had decided that while his appeal hearings were being held, Lieutenant Calley should not be in prison, but he could be out on bail.
President, you said that you intervened in the Calley case in the national interest. I wonder if you could define for us in greater detail how you feel it was served by your intervention in the case.
I felt that it was proper for me to indicate that I would review the case because there was great concern expressed throughout the country as to whether or not this was a case involving, as it did, so many complex factors in which Captain Calley was going to get a fair trial.
Ultimately, he had to serve in total about 4 months in the stockade at Fort Leavenworth, and by that time it was deemed that he had served enough time and he was released.
I think that Nixon's intervention passed the word that nobody is going to get punished for what happened here. And